Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with welcome and introductions. Welcome everyone. My name is Mariah Bruner. I'm UCA's Wellness Coordinator serving faculty and staff. Thank you all for being here today. I know it's been quite a year. I know we've all been touched by grief in various ways, and I just want to acknowledge that. The university acknowledges that. We know it's been hard, and so we know this is a really important topic. So I'm really glad you all are here today. I wanted to just do a few housekeeping items at the beginning before we get started. First off, if you are a BeWell participant, you can earn 5 lifestyle rewards for this session, and I will explain how to do that at the end. So hang in for that. And I also just wanted to take a moment to introduce our guest speaker. So today we have Emily Durham. Emily is a licensed professional counselor and a certified employee assistance professional with the Arkansas Employee Assistance Program. She is also our contract manager. So she is our point of contact for Employee Assistance Program here at UCA. So we are really, really glad to have Emily here with us today. She loves talking about this topic and she's knowledgeable and she has many years of experience. So welcome, Emily. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Mariah. Thank you for having us. We at the EAP are always happy and excited when we get in front of people who are our employees and eligible for our program, especially when we're talking about something like grief, which these days with the pandemic, obviously everybody has some degree of it. Everybody has some degree of it. And then there are unique challenges with the pandemic. We are experiencing multiple losses at the same time, that they build on each other, these losses that we're having so quickly that we don't even necessarily know we're suffering or we're affected by them, whether it be our performance or our health or our attitude. So I know that all of you can read, so I'm not planning on reading. I'm going to do you that favor, not reading every slide to you, but I will read some of my favorite slides to you. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. What we're going to talk about today, and I call it the art of grief, because I will just say at the beginning that I do think at the end I'll talk some about using art as a therapeutic tool for dealing with grief, whether it be individually or in groups and families. And so I'm going to touch on that, and I'm going to have some different kind of handouts and exercises that I will send to Mariah that you could ask her for if you were wanting that. So I don't want you to think that, oh, if I have to write this down right now, or I never saw, I don't think I can do it, or whatever. So let's get started. Okay, now it's not moving forward, Mariah.
Well, you can try clicking the arrow key, or you can go to the bottom of the slide and there's a little arrow that will appear to advance your slides.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. There you go.
One of the things I'll just, my caveat, one of the things that I am in grief about is having to do so many Zooms and different video virtual things versus face-to-face. So I'm way behind the curve on that. So anyway, our objectives today are, just to talk a little bit about, what grief is, and different kinds of losses we experience, symptoms of that grief, examine the 5 stages plus 1, which you will see, and at the end, appreciate the power of self-expression through the grieving process. So in defining grief, essentially, we talk a lot about grief, and grief is the emotion itself. Grief is the experience of the loss. Grief, we think of grief a lot as I'm grieving because I've had a major loss, a death, a divorce, a huge health issue, but we grieve anything any change that we didn't want. There is some degree of sadness to anything that changes that we didn't want, even if it's just, I know I experience it all the time because, I think I like my job the way it is, and every time they make a change, I have to learn something else, and then I'm in denial, and then I'm angry, and I go through the whole thing. So grief is not an option. We can't just say, stop grieving. I'm being a baby. I shouldn't feel this way. Feelings themselves are not optional. Mourning, however, is the way that we grieve. It is the outward expression. Some people, they might be crying a lot, or they might be angry and acting out, or they might be talking to their friends and developing a support system, or going to the EAP and seeing a counselor, which is, obviously one of the best ways to handle the mourning. So that's the part that we have a control over. How are we going to get through this grief? We have to acknowledge that it is something we have to deal with, that we can't just shut it off, because I think, as you know, if you don't deal with your emotions, then they're going to go somewhere, whether they go to, your body, your attitude, some other, your ulcer. And so we want to avoid that, right? And there are different types of losses. And most people, especially during this pandemic, we are experiencing more than one of these. There's loss of possessions. And sometimes it can be a big possession. It might be our house, might be our car. It might be, I think about this sometimes. I still grieve 2 years later. Just a little antique pin my mother gave me. It was this beautiful gold and sapphire with a little diamond in it. And I wanted that my whole childhood. And she gave me that pin. And I one day wore it to work right here. And when I got home, it wasn't there. And I'd been like 15 places and that pin was gone. And still to this day, I'm like, just hate that I don't have that pin. And so even the smallest things, we are experiencing some grief. Loss of self, that's a big one. And what I mean by that is, if our job has changed, we're learning new things. I'm sure at UCA that a lot of you have had to alter, if not everybody, alter how they do the job to some degree. Or if people, yourself or other people have their job changed or cut back, then we can lose self-confidence. Again, just having to do these Zoom things is I've been struggling with my self-confidence a little. You could ask Mariah, she saw it already. We can lose relationships, and during the pandemic, we may have relationships. I used to have several friends that I had at least a once a month lunch date with, and now I haven't. And we try to text and things, but I feel that loss of those relationships. And sometimes it might be a relationship, might be a divorce or a breakup, or a friend or coworker, and we grieve those things, and they affect how secure we feel. They affect how stable and supported we feel. And then, of course, finally, the one we're most commonly think of as grief producing, the death or dying of a loved one. There are populations that are at higher risk for losses during the pandemic, and it's important just to think about those things. I'm not going to read every one of those, but if you or someone else has a pre-existing medical condition, is diabetic, we need to take that into consideration. Whether I interact less with people because they have that condition, but thinking of people who we know, coworkers who are caregivers, or are we caregivers ourselves? People who've experienced loss from a job or from family members, people with disabilities. Sometimes I don't know how many times we really even think about the homeless. Like, where are they? How are they getting the help they need? And I did also think, where were they sleeping when there was 3 feet of snow on the ground too? So, we have to be aware of that, whether it's us or somebody else in our life. Some people are at higher risk, and if we are reaching out to them and if we're taking into account, some of our choices about how we handle those relationships will change. And we can shift, really can experience a shift from being harshly judging, say, ourselves if we have one of these conditions, to being more proactive in our stance and accepting of, I just need to take these things into account and let them factor into how I handle my day-to-day life. One of the things, and I did allude to that a moment ago, is the pandemic brings about a special potential for complicated grief. I imagine everybody that we know has some degree of complicated grief at this point, because what happens is in the list, you may or may not have health complications, or again, if you have diabetes and you have to, or asthma, and you have to be double careful. And then maybe you're also grieving the illness or death of a loved one, and maybe you're feeling isolated, and you've definitely lost some of your routines in the familiar. And that can be even little things, again, that you didn't necessarily realize or appreciate as a grief. And one example that I was thinking of is, for 40 years, even when I didn't live in Little Rock, but my best friend did, we used to go with her grandmother, Nanny. She would take us to Frankie's. Y'all familiar with Frankie's on Rodney Parham? And they'd have a sign that said, "This is the oldest running restaurant in Little Rock." And I like to go there when I wanted some vegetables, because I don't cook at all. And so, but I would go, once a week or once every other week. And I live right by there. I pass it every day when I go to work or when I go anywhere, because I live close. And every time I go in, I think about those days when Nanny used to take us 40 years ago, and now they closed. Every time I pass, the oldest open restaurant in Little Rock, and there's no cars there. And they have really good greens and spaghetti. And there's all these things, and every time I feel a pang, it's not this great, huge grief in and of itself. That I found out the other day, they closed Copeland's. I don't know if you're familiar with that restaurant, but I don't know where else you could get crab claws. And so I had some grief about that. But it's about these things getting layered on, on top of that loss of normal human interactions, handshakes and hugs, and even sitting closer than 6 feet away from somebody else. We're all experiencing that way. We're all experiencing uncertainty about the future, job instability, health instability, what's going to happen next. And of course, some people who are, especially people who maybe already deal with an addiction, and that's a lot of people in our country, because we're not really, really good about taking the time to handle our feelings. We want things to just happen fast. And grief doesn't work that way. Grief just doesn't work that way. But we don't really accept that. And so people will use all kinds of unproductive ways to cope. They might, with it be increased, they have alcohol, tobacco, or other substance issues, opiates, or if they have process addictions like shopping, gambling, pornography, there's video games. I myself, especially during a time when I was the most isolated, I will confess to just a little bit of a shopping addiction, is that I only had 4 channels on my TV, and 2 of them were HSN and QVC. So I spent a lot of money that I didn't need to spend, but it made me feel better in a minute, but it wasn't a good coping skill for my boredom or my loneliness or whatever. So when we have all these things layering, and some of them we're not even being aware of, then it's hard to even suss out, what am I suffering. Why am I feeling so bad? Is it this or this or this or this? Or I shouldn't feel so bad. The fact that Frankie's closed is not the worst thing in the world. But if you add that to the other 50 things that are different, changes that happen that I didn't want to have happen, then we can start feeling a lot worse than we think we ought to feel. And grief is not a linear process. We talk about the stages of grief, but they really aren't linear. We would love it if you look on this chart, we would love it if we'd say, well, you know, I was in denial for a while, but now I'm at depression, so I'm only 6 away from adjustment, you know, and we love it if it was that way. Oh, I'm sorry about my phone. And I have clients, you know, not infrequently, who, whatever their loss, it might be, it's often a death or a divorce or a breakup, but might be a job change or a job loss, but a parent or loved one having to go into a nursing home. And they will ask, when am I going to feel better? How long is this going to last? And there's absolutely no answer to that, because grief is much more like what you're seeing on the right side of your screen. The way people grieve is as unique as their fingerprint. You know, it's like, well, you know, maybe I'm kind of halfway to hope on one end and completely in denial about some other part, and or the next layer happens, and so we ping pong around, and unfortunately it's like that. Now that's not hopeless, but it is daunting to look at that image. So 3 things that I think we really need to be aware of when we are looking at our grieving process, when we are considering what we're going through, what we're putting ourselves through. And I call it the 3 perilous P's of grieving. And then I realized today I could have said the 3 perilous pitfalls of the pandemic grieving. But first of all, and this is something I see a lot with over the years with people who maybe have had someone who died, but it can happen with any grief, and that is people take too much personal responsibility for it. Maybe they had someone, now this isn't pandemic related, but maybe they had someone who died in a car wreck, and they had intended to call that person for lunch that day. And that person would have been on the other side of town. So they'll say, it's my fault. You know, if I had just called them. Or we might say, oh, you know, my sister or my mother got COVID, and if I had washed my hands better, or maybe if I had completely stripped down and put on a hazmat suit or something, that wouldn't have happened. And sometimes we do that. It's very common to do that, because if we can blame ourselves and say we should have done something else, then we feel less powerless. And the truth is that we are powerless over some things. It's not something that we could have done ourselves, but that's a reality that's hard for people to accept. Second of all, it can become very pervasive, like you stop feeling any kind of joy or satisfaction in any part of your life. It's like, what difference does it make? I'm still having to wear this mask. I'm still having to stay 6 feet. I still could get sick. This person is sick. My job is still that. But it isn't affecting every single area of your life. And there are good areas of your life. And it's important to stay aware of those things and not let it, we have to compartmentalize a little bit. It's like, yes, that is definitely a pandemic related grief issue, but there's still some wonderful things in my life. And we have to be really aware, vigilantly aware of our self-talk. because you'd start talking this way to yourself way before you maybe even realize it. That's the way you're talking to yourself. That's what you're imagining. And if we stay too much in the past, then that causes us to feel depressed. Well, it was so much better before, and now it's horrible, and I'm really bummed out. Or we let our imagination take us too much into the future, and we experience a lot of anxiety that I don't know what's going to happen next. And wherever we think what we think about, our emotions follow. It might be a habit of thinking that way, but if you're not doing yourself a favor, if you let yourself, you can't just turn it off in an instant, but realize it, and then you sort of have to move your mind to healthier ways of dealing with your thoughts. Now, people experience, as I said, the things you experience in grief are as unique as, but people do tend to have maybe one or two of these ways that are listed here, that they're more likely to be the way they experience it. Emotional might be irritable. Physical might be that your IBS is out of control. I have an ulcer. It's named for an ex-boss I used to have, but we might have the physical, we might have behavioral, that going back to that kind of addictive behavior to try to get away from feeling bad. Psychological, we might have depression. Social, we might get so withdrawn even in ways we don't have to be. If I have to talk to people, and some of these things I try really hard to be aware of myself. For instance, with the social, I myself have been in a Toastmasters group. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Toastmasters, for years. And when they were during the pandemic said, well, we're going to have to go to presenting these speeches and stuff virtually. I was like, I'm not doing it until this pandemic's over. And I sure didn't think that it would be a year later. And still, and then I said, I'm not going to do it if everybody's wearing a mask, because then I can't see how much they're smiling at how good I'm doing. So I haven't gone back, but I'm starting to think if this is going to go on for another year, that I might just have to deal with my grief, my social grief on that. And of course, there is spiritual effects, and sometimes that would look a lot like maybe hopelessness or losing some faith in why would God or the universe let this happen. And we start questioning those things that maybe have held us in good stead for a long time in our life. So paying attention to your symptoms and realizing that there might be something that you need to change in order to deal with it in a more healthier way. So as I said, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was the premier person who started researching and conceptualizing the stages of grief. I'm not going to go into a long diatribe about all the stages, because pretty much everybody knows anger, denial, bargaining, depression, acceptance. The important part I want you to remember first is they're fluid, that you can't just go, oh, check, I'm no longer going to feel anger, because at any time that could rise back up. But I do love this cartoon. I thought it was so perfect, and kind of just in a thumbnail explaining them. And the little guy comes in and he wants some French fries, and there are no French fries anymore. What? That's not possible. I saw a guy walking out of this shop with a bag full of French fries. Denial, anger. You better hand me your French fries or I'll kick your, I'll say, butt to the moon. Bargaining. Come on, I'm sure you have one or two left in the back. Please, just give them to me and I'll leave. Depression. I'll never taste the sweet flavor of French fries again. And acceptance. Okay, give me a hamburger. And I thought it would be funny if you think about this cartoon again, but you think about it back when we couldn't get any toilet paper, right? All of those things. I just saw somebody else walking out with a basket full of them. It's like, I can't believe that y'all are so incompetent that you didn't get enough. And oh my gosh, there's just got to be, somebody who's got some somewhere in the back. You've hidden them, or I'll never ever have the convenience of toilet paper again. So, do you have any cotton balls or whatever that you have to do to move to acceptance? So, those are the 5 stages of grief we most often think of. Denial, this can't be happening. Anger, whose fault is this? Like, how many people were like, oh, it's the Chinese fault that we have this pandemic anyway. Or, bargaining, if we could just listen to this guy or that guy or that guy, maybe we won't have, all the fallout from the pandemic. And then depression, it's like life will never be the same again. Like maybe I'll never even feel good or safe again. And then of course acceptance is that part we get to where we're have to create a new normal. And that does happen eventually. I was thinking today, not only do people have these stages of grief, but these same kinds of things happen at a whole country level. You can, not everybody in the country, but it's this overriding feeling in the country. And I think, for instance, that the United States stayed in denial for a long time, and maybe it ping pongs back and forth now between anger, bargaining, and depression, but I don't really think we've gotten to acceptance altogether. That we don't know how long this is going to go on, and we'll just, especially the masks, for me, I just hate the masks, but not just as individuals, but if we move forward as individuals, we will impact how other people in our community and world in our country are able to move forward in dealing with this. Because if we are really stuck in grief, we are not being as productive as we could be in handling the problem. So then there's, when I said that there was 5 plus 1, there is, I don't know if everybody has heard about the 6th stage of grief. And that is finding meaning, because sometimes, this is something that came along like at the end of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's life. And the David Kessler, who wrote this book, I don't know if y'all can see it, but it's called Finding Meaning, the 6th stage of grief. Because he found that acceptance isn't necessarily enough for a lot of people. Acceptance means I'm back on solid ground, that I am creating a new normal. But depending on the severity of the loss, sometimes we can't move forward without finding some kind of meaning, some kind of purpose, some kind of growth aspect to what we're going through. So the 6th stage of grief is about finding meaning and incorporating this experience into part of your life story. Because I want you to think about any and every bad thing that ever happened to you in your life. Everyone, we've all had, if we live long enough, some really, really hard, really painful, really sad, really difficult times, right? And we lived through all of them. Every single one of them you lived through, or you wouldn't be here listening to me at this moment, right? But we are changed. We are changed, and hopefully, ultimately, we're changed for the better. I often think about, even though we don't want a hard time and we wouldn't want to go back through a hard time, if you think back, what were the moments in your life that you really found out what you were made of and who you were and what you could stand and take as a human being? So part of meaning making is making it part of your story and finding gratitude for what you had. But I think this is an interesting one with death. I think a lot of times we really get that. I would, even if my loved one died sooner than I would have expected, I'm not going to say that I wish I hadn't had them and I wish that they hadn't been part of my life. But some of the other things, like if we were to lose a job or something, we might find it hard to be grateful that we had that job for as long as we did, or we had the experience of having that job. But it is important because, unless you have something until the day you take your last breath, you're going to be losing things through time. And also to recognize and appreciate the support that we have received. Sometimes we're so focused on what we still need or how we're still hurting that we're not really appreciating that, hey, there's been a lot of people that have been in my corner and are still in my corner, and I could call, and I'm not alone. And to accept that closure is not the goal of the grief process. It is because you are changed. And if the grief aspect is big enough, you are never going to not be affected by that. But hopefully I'll be able to get over that heirloom pen, but I'm not sure. But realizing that hopefully we're transforming into someone who is stronger and more resilient and wiser and a better friend or family member because of what we have experienced. And very important, I think, to be able to cultivate something honorable to bring forth as a result of your experience. Sometimes people create memorials, even if that's just a tradition. My uncle, he died when I was 25, and I loved him, just second only to my dad. And sometimes I loved him more than my dad, but, and he died an untimely death. But, I made this ritual. He loved pumpkin pie. Really, that was the only pie I even liked. So every fall, I make pumpkin pies for everybody. And I've been doing that for 30 years, right? It's like, I hope people like pumpkin pies because I always get one from Emily around Thanksgiving. So that might be a small thing, but it does bring something honorable because I'm always telling the story of my uncle. His name was Chauncey, and why he was such an amazing person and what he taught me. So I'm bringing forward, he's still with me. I think about it, something that's major, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That was what Candy Lightner's attempt to deal with the loss of her 13-year-old daughter to a drunk driver. And of course, how many people has MAD saved? That was something huge she brought forward to give meaning to the loss. And I'm sure if I could talk to Candy Lightner and say, you can either have your child back or you can have all the good that's come from MAD, she'd probably say, I'll take my daughter back. But still, lots and lots of people have benefited, and she can know that her daughter's life and death was not in vain. Another way to cultivate something honorable, I read just the other day on the Google News feed that there's a huge uptick in applications to medical school because of this. They're calling it the Fauci effect, that he has been inspired a lot of people to get into the medical fields, and I can't help but hope they're getting into it for the right reason, to really be able to help prevent this sort of thing in the future. So I'm not going to read all these questions. This is one of the things that I can send to you. I'm going to send to Mariah, but we do have to start with some soul searching. We do have to look at, how do I make sense of what happened? What have I learned about myself? What have I learned about how resilient I am? What have I learned about how capable I am, or resourceful I am, or maybe how vulnerable I am in some ways, and the others in my life as well? How has adversity changed me? What can help provide a new order to my life? So, just being able to think about these things. And I do love this quote by Jane Goodall: what you do makes a difference. And you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. That's the part that's in your power, to decide what way you're going to handle your morning. Another quote I really love that goes to that part about gratitude. All I know from my own experience is that the more loss we feel, the more grateful we should be for whatever it was we had to lose. Even if it was we lost, we're never going to probably be shaking hands with people as much as we used to, or even feel as comfortable necessarily to hug people or sit as close. There could be an upside to that if people will keep their distance from me in the Kroger and not crowd me. But to sometimes when we've lost things like our job the way we liked it, it's hard to say I'm grateful that I had it that way for as long as I did. But that's important to realize your life is fluid. Everything is not going to stay at optimum every moment of your life until the day you die. So also, it's important for us to be grateful for the people who supported us and to ask for help, not because you're weak, but because you want to remain strong. And I think if you think about our country, we're such a country based on rugged individualism. I can do it myself. I don't need anybody else. Asking for help is weakness. Asking for help is for people who don't have their act together or are kind of pitiful in some way. And that's just really wrong, that nobody is an island, and that asking for help it does build our community, and it builds relationships, and it makes other people feel important and valuable in your life. So a lot of times I think we would be more comfortable saying, I'll give help than ask for it. But when we give help, we feel good, don't we? We feel like, I'm a pretty decent person, and yes, I'll help my neighbors. So adjusting to these changes, what does it take? And I hope there's a couple of practical ideas here, but one of the most important ones is that we have to stay in the here and now, not go back and spend too much time in bemoaning the loss of the past or fear of the future. And mindfulness exercises are really good for people with this, to stay in the present, to realize that at least in this moment, at this time, at this second, I'm safe. I have what I need. I am okay in this moment, and allow yourself to feel that okayness versus feeling the sadness of depression or the fear of anxiety. Acknowledge your feelings. Acknowledge whether that, hey, I'm bummed out that the Frankie closed, which I know, again, that's small, but to, give voice to it. You don't have to belabor the point forever, but, especially with complicated grief, to at least have some place to voice it. And it does affect me. And that does make me sad, and validate the experience of others, because we don't know what all else anybody might be struggling with. Accept what you can control. If you're familiar with the serenity prayer, help me to accept the serenity to accept what I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, and most importantly, the wisdom to know the difference. I can wear a mask. I can wash my hands. I can get more educated about this process. I can get vaccinated, but I cannot make my neighbors And the other day, I was in Walgreens and I got my mask on, which I had to walk all the way to Walgreens and realize I didn't have the mask and go back to my car and then come back again, because that happens a lot. But I'm in the Walgreens, and then I noticed like this group of young folks come in, like 6 of them come in, not one of them with a mask. And I could tell that it was like purposeful, like, we're not wearing a mask. And I couldn't control them, but I could kind of control staying away from them. And that was the part. If I felt like it was just too much, I can control leaving the Walgreens and go in and getting my prescription in the drive-thru. So it's important to let go. I can't control that. What can I control to deal with it rather than be mad and upset? Because I think these young people were kind of, if I was to guess, in the anger stage. Nobody's going to tell us we have to do this. Embrace all that is still you and yours. Because there's certain parts of you as a human being nobody can take away. Your victories in the past, nobody can take away. The wisdom you've already acquired in life up to this point, nobody can take away. The love of your family, your love for your family. And I think this one is really important, and I really have found this to be happening to some degree, to foster a return to a community mentality versus that rugged individualism. And so many people just isolating, they're going to do it just on their own. But to really say, maybe that would be the silver lining out of this, that people are going to stay more aware of, does my neighbor need this, or what's going on with them? Do they have what they need? I haven't had any trouble getting toilet paper lately, but I'm sure be glad if my neighbor came over and shared their toilet paper if I was out. And to actively practice kindness, which is the actively looking to see if somebody else needs something. Yes, I may need some things, but there are things I have that maybe I can do for other people. And I mean that at work, in your neighborhood, at church, with your family, just to actually really consciously look for ways to say, I'm going to focus on what can I do that would be kind for somebody else, rather than focusing on the news and how many people have the COVID this week, or what's the next thing that's going to happen in the political arena. And so we get to that creating a new normal. Now I'm looking at the time, and I want to ask Mariah, I need to wrap up in about 5 minutes, right?
I think that would be good. We could have some time for some questions and answers, and maybe a short discussion.
Okay, well, I'm just might have to go quickly through this then. And that one thing I want you to remember is that emotions need motion. The word emote comes from the root of to move. Emotions are fluid. I want you to think of it as that you're a channel that your emotions have to go through. We can try to stop them and ignore them and be in denial about them, but your emotions will not be ignored. Even if if they eat a hole in your stomach, or you have chronic migraines, or your relationships are suffering because you have no patience anymore, they can seep out. You can either sort of take control of how am I going to deal with them, or they're going to seep out in ways that are unpleasant. So just remembering, remember, you're not your feelings. It is something that is going through the vessel. They're fluid. You're not always going to feel the same way. You are more than your feelings. You're just experiencing feelings. And so at the end, I told you I would just mention that art making is one way. I wanted to just give you something practical. I want you to know, when I say art making, it does not mean you have to be artistic at all. It's about the process. And the thing that is wonderful about making art, for one, is that we are enlisting our subconscious mind. Just as almost like just as dreams do. We probably all had dreams at times that which made some connections for us. Part of the goal of dreams is to help us deal with the problems in life. And so it's when we are looking at our feelings, attracted to things or drawing things, we might not even know why that's what the image that came up for me. But then you can think about that. So it engages the subconscious mind. It promotes exploration. It's just one tool. Again, I'm not saying this is the whole answer for everybody, but it pairs difficult emotions with a positive sensory experience that you have some control over. I can make this. And it uses usually both hands, and you're using both sides of your brain, which science has found that that definitely helps you heal faster and more completely when both sides of your brain are involved in that. It's one of the reasons that even going for a walk will make you feel better in solving a problem because of the bilateral stimulation that's going on. So these things can help stimulate, and then we can control that. There are any number of therapeutic art tasks, and this is not an exhaustive list. Some of these I'm going to send you a little description of the exercise so you could do it, but drawings, again, stick figures is fine. Anybody can make a collage if you have a whole stack of magazines, and you'd be surprised at what'll come. Why was I attracted to that dolphin jumping out of the water? I don't know, but I'm going to cut it out and put it on my collage and figure it out as I go. I'm going to send you the exercise about memory box because that's a great one to do with children. If you have children that are grieving a loss of somebody or something. If you are not tone deaf, which I am, so making music is not an option for me. But if you are in some way musically inclined, and maybe you were as a child and you let it go, pick it back up. So that's a list of some different kind of tasks that are found to be therapeutic. So I'm just going to show you one of the exercises that I'm going to send you. This is one that you're kind of going through a particular life cycle. Again, you will get these pages, and it's a great thing to do with kids. It's a great thing to do as a family. If you're going through something, draw what has been changed or lost. Draw, that Frankie's is not open and never get good greens again, or whatever that, or draw that I haven't hugged my mother in a year, and she's 92. So I fear I might never get to hug her again. That would be something I might put on there, right? But I mean, whatever image spoke to me symbolically. And then when you do that, and it can be stick figures, go and share it with somebody. That's why it's good to do in a family or group. But share, that's what we would have done if we had a live. I would have had you draw something for a couple of minutes and then share it with your neighbor. But to share it, and then after you pick the images, then sometimes we make sense of those things through verbalizing them. The second drawing would then be, what would your life, the situation, look like if the pain were better? And finally, and share that one. And then finally, the drawing, what is needed to change the first picture into the second picture? And sometimes the pictures that you would draw or pick on a collage, you'll be surprised, but they can open up the answer for you. So I'm going to send you that to Mariah. And one last thought. Your way back from your grief or your loss will happen very slowly, almost like a whisper. And here are the references if y'all want books and websites that might be helpful, both for just grief in general and the art therapy. So thank you for listening. I appreciate everybody's taking their time to attend. And I turn it back over to Mariah.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really wonderful. If you wouldn't mind, Emily, if you can, stop share on slides, and that way we can come together and have a short discussion.
Okay.
If anybody would like to, I would just like to open up the floor to reflections. What'd you think? Did anything stand out to you? You can unmute yourselves or you can share it in the chat.
That must mean I did a really, really good job of explaining it if there aren't any questions. But even if you have questions about a particular situation or what would be a good coping skill for that. And if you don't have any questions here, I still want to give you a few more minutes if you think of something, but want to put my plug in for the EAP again. I've lost, I don't know, something is coming up all over my computer, but can you still see me, Mariah?
We can. Yes, we can. I'm sharing some information. It's okay. You keep talking.
Oh, okay. And so I just want to put that plug in about the EAP because that is one way to be able to get a proactive way to get some support and someone who doesn't necessarily want to fix it and stop you from grieving because they can't stand to see you in pain, or they don't know how to be with you, or they don't know. I always think it's funny because people will be like, if you said, what do you need when you're really grieving? You would say, I just need people to not pity me, but be with me and realize that they can't fix it. And that even though I feel bad, I'm still going to survive. And yet, when somebody else is grieving, we want to try to go in and fix it because we can't stand our own discomfort at them being uncomfortable. So the EAP is here for you guys.
Emily, that's a great reminder. I was gonna, sorry, let me get my thoughts back together. You can visit our website, uca.edu/BeWell. We have a tab on the BeWell website that has all the information you need to access the Employee Assistance Program. Just a reminder, it's free of charge for UCA employees that are benefits eligible. Your dependents are also eligible, and it's easy to access. You can do in person, you can do on the phone, you can do a video conference. So we have lots of options that are COVID friendly. We wanted to make sure that that was a priority during what has been a very crazy year. So there's different ways to access that resource.
And I do want to say just real quick that maybe we all are prejudiced, but we think that the EAP is the best benefit that people have that most people don't know about or don't access. So usually people are happy when they decided it couldn't hurt, right? That's right. All I want to say about that.
Thank you. That's good. Those are good closing thoughts. Real quick, there is a link in the chat for all attendees. If you just take a moment and fill that out, that lets us know how we did with this presentation. I'll share that feedback with Emily after today. And if you want those resources that Emily referred to, please send me an email. I put my email in the chat as well. It's mbruner1@uca.edu. I'm happy to get you those materials. After today concludes, I'll get those from Emily. And what else? Let me think. Emily, would you be willing to share your slides in a PDF format so that we can get those out as well?
Sure. Okay. So I just need to get Sam to help me with that. Okay.
That's fine. We'll work on it.
Take me a few days because she's sick. Not with the COVID, but
we can work that out offline. Well, we will officially adjourn. Thank you all for attending today. I will
thank y'all for listening. I appreciate it.
Yes, I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any questions. Thank you all.
Thank you. So I'm just going to